Whereabouts in Arkansas, Jen?
I am in West Fork, Arkansas, a teeny tiny little town just south of Fayetteville, northwest.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I don't know where West Fork is, but Fayetteville, I got you.
West Fork. Hey, John and Matt, I need help.
Okay.
I am an atheist and have been for about 10 years, but I was raised evangelical, fervent evangelical Christian, and was actually a pastor's wife in the 90s.
Did you ever hit your knees and ask for God to reveal himself to you?
They were bloody.
Yeah.
Of course, it was actually studying the Bible that helped my ex and I come out of that religion. Mm-hmm. And it was studying science. You know, the geology got me out of the flood, evolution out of creation, and psychology out of prophecy, dreams, healings, etc. Mm-hmm. But there's one thing I have not been able to explain, and I truly, truly need help.
Okay.
I will never go back to religion. I will never go back to a belief in God or any kind of God. But there was an incident where a woman had knowledge, showed up on our doorstep, stayed with us 30 days, had knowledge that no one else could have had about individuals in our congregation. And I hope I can make this brief, and please tell me if I'm getting off track.
No, go for it.
Well, all right. My ex and I came home. We lived behind our church in a little apartment downtown Flippin, Arkansas. My ex and I came home from work, did our normal evening routine, got up in the morning, and there was a woman crouched in a sleeping bag on our back porch, scared, weirdly doing a stream of consciousness conversation. She couldn't stop talking. Her eyes were wild. Amateur diagnosis, paranoid schizophrenic. We invited her in after 3 nights sleeping on her porch. She was finally able to come in. She was timid as a mouse. But she would sit there and just babble on, you know, just her eyes would light on something and she would have to talk about the granola bars or the cereal or the kitchen table. It was just a whole long stream. But finally, I think she gained some trust in us. She talked about bees stinging her all the time, and I asked her what bees are stinging her, and she motion to her buttocks. So I figured that maybe she had gotten a lot of injections in her poor, sick life. She went on about stories that she told about a supposed daughter whose was her name. She used her name, Linda, as her daughter's name, and all the stories she told about her supposed daughter were actually about her, but she couldn't speak about them. She couldn't
Sure.
face that. But anyway, during our church services, she attended, because she was living with us, she attended our church services right there in the church. She would just pick random verses, seemingly random verses out of the Bible and start reading them. And keep in mind, we'd never met her. She'd never been in our tiny town before. She would have stood out like a sore thumb. She would read a verse, and I would just get aghast, because knowing as a pastor's wife that someone in our congregation was either going through something or was being, having bad behavior, the verse that she would read was applicable to certain people in the congregation. She did it Sunday after Sunday. Well, one Sunday, this gentleman who was an engineer, thoughtful, intelligent, well-respected man, flew out of the building at the end of the service, and I went running after her. I said, "Yo, what's wrong? What's wrong?" He says, "I am not coming back into your building until that woman is gone." And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "She, in a man's voice that I knew in California, told me something no one else knows, something I did wrong. And it scares the crap out of me. I am not ever coming back until she is gone." Another incident is my ex-husband was an alcoholic on the streets of Albuquerque, would go down to Tijuana all the time and get into a lot of trouble, got thrown into jail down there. One day, this woman, Linda, was accusing him, standing there with her finger outstretched, pointing at him and saying, "I saw you when you were in jail in Tijuana. I saw you when you were drunk on the streets and couldn't get up. And I saw you when they were beating you up and stealing your glasses in Albuquerque." And it's like, what?
So
this has never come.
So we're actually over time, but I want to kind of address this. Let's assume that John and I can give you no explanation for this at all.
Yes.
So
I need it. This is the last thing I can put down.
Well, the thing is, at worst, you have something that you can't explain. There's all kinds of things that we can't explain yet or currently, or you may not have enough information. I will say, there are con artists that can find out information about you that you may well not know. There are also people who are more observant about things. We know that, and I won't say this is the case for all of them, this may be a mix of things, but there's a reason why pastors can get up and preach from the Bible and touch someone in the congregation. And it's because pretty much any verse that you pick, especially anything that's about the human condition or about life experience, is going to apply to somebody in the room. So those things to me are wholly unimpressive. I had a family member, he was praying for whether or not he should buy into this oil well scheme, and he opened up the Bible, and there was a passage there that said, invest your money, and he took it as, this was God answering his prayer. Now, let's assume that God was willing to answer his prayer and actually did want him to invest his money. Why the hell would he have to play, Bible verse bingo and not just have God say, hey, I want you to invest your money? But that stuff's not all impressive. The guy who heard it in a man's voice, if you got somebody, I don't know, how long did you say she was with you guys in your congregation?
Exactly 30 days. And she had to leave because my mother-in-law, who also lived with us, we came home from work, and my mother-in-law was screaming outside of the house. Get rid of her. She is not allowed to speak to me in that way. And we only assume that she told my mother-in-law something that she didn't want to hear.
So one of the things is that
to hear what she said.
As soon as there's a reputation that somebody's a little bit spooky or knows something, and you can find this out for mentalists, you start reading more into it, and you start finding more. If you're doing like a mentalism act or mind reading act, if you can convince the people that you can do stuff, then all of a sudden things which aren't even that difficult or that impressive become all the more impressive. I don't know what the explanation is for what she did. I wasn't there. There's no way for me to investigate it. I can't say it was all a trick or anything else. What I can say is that from what we know about psychology, from what we know about picking a verse out of the Bible, especially if people are in a mood to find significance, they will find significance. Yeah. And another thing I know about churches, there's a lot of loose chatter and talk and gossip. And if there's somebody who's paying attention, the fact that the person she's talking to doesn't think she could possibly know this about them, unless there was nobody else around who knew this, it's possible. So unless the declaration was, I know what you did in that closet at home when nobody else was around, then there's a possibility. And in the modern, like I said, I can't give you an explanation for what it is, which is why I started with, if we can't, then at worst I don't have an explanation. It would be an error to think that just because we don't have an explanation for these things, that therefore we have any good reason to think something supernatural is going on, when we know that from a psychology perspective, people read more into stuff. People, once they're primed to start accepting that something weird's going on, it gets weirder and weirder. And, it would be an interesting case study to try to figure out, what do you know about the person? I mean, did anybody run a background check? Is this Yes,
we did. We got her on public assistance. We found out her true name, her social security number, her history, where she'd lived before, that she was in mental institutions, that she probably she told a story about her daughter being, her name was Linda, but she said her daughter's name was Linda. Her name was really Lindia, which is not true. About her daughter being taken by her boyfriend and sold to men on the streets when she was 12. So this was probably all her past, and it, either created great psychosis in her or whatever. But all I know is it was creepy, spooky. And I believe you. I believe you on a part about that we were predisposed to believe these things, but it was so accurate. And she didn't have contact with the rest of the congregation. She was really much too sick in the head for anybody to spend time with her other than in a safe environment that we provided.
So first of all,
didn't have knowledge. Okay.
So while I have some minimal expertise in this area, I'm not by any means an expert, but I know some experts. And the first thing I would say is, we don't even have close to enough information to begin an investigation of this to figure out what the answer is. And so it just, unfortunately, as discomforting as it is, It has to get written off as, man, that was weird. I don't know why.
I agree. It's pretty spooky.
Yeah.
I wish I had more for you, Jen, but I don't.
Yeah.
And so the best thing is just, keep your eyes and ears open. Try to make sure that if something like this happens again, we get, better documentation or something. Because one of the things is, how long ago was this?
It was in the 90s.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this is not anything negative about you. But eyewitness testimony is awful. And our memory is awful. And there's a reason that stories tend to get amplified and misremembered. There was a study, and I talked about this in the last video I did, where I think it was 1 week after 9/11, they interviewed a whole bunch of people for specific details of that day. And then I think it was 1 year later and 3 years later, they interviewed them again. And the accuracy dropped off dramatically by the third year. And this is for something, a flashbulb memory of an amazing event. I'm not saying that you're embellishing or misremembering, and definitely not that you're consciously doing it. It's just that we know so much about how flawed our thinking is, how flawed our memory is, and the further we get removed from these events, the less we should trust it. And so for me, I remember weird stuff happening in the 80s. And when I look back on it, my thing is, I'm not even sure I'm remembering that right. But even if I am, I don't have an explanation. That's unfortunate. I'll keep an eye out for if something like that happens again, because I know more now and may be able to take better notes, investigate more. But yeah, it sucks. There's all kinds of things we're just not going to be able to explain. So I'm sorry, Jen, but that's at the end of the show, and we've got to go. But, drop an email, and I'll call back some other time. I'm sure people would love to talk to you and hear more about it.
Okay, I'll send an email, the whole story.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Whoops. There we go. On that note, thanks everybody on the other side, of which a huge proportion had actually hit their knees and asked for God to reveal themselves.